I left without uttering a single word. No cardboard containers, no corridor steps. Simply my identification card deposited in the collection bin like a defunct access pass. It produced a subtle click. The type of noise that lingers when your identity vanishes from the database. My identity is Vesper Quinn. I am 39 years of age, and until 20 minutes prior, I held a directorial position in corporate sales at one of the most rapidly expanding technology firms on the Pacific Coast. For nearly 8 years, I secured contracts that others had abandoned. Discreetly.
Consistently.
I established my standing through quietude because that represents my optimal working method. No theatrics, no declarations, merely figures that conveyed their own message. 2 days prior, I completed an arrangement with a customer that possessed the capacity to generate $65 million across the upcoming 3 quarters. The process required 7 months of deliberations, 3 decision-making authorities, 5 revision cycles, and I never faltered once. I understood the customer's challenges more thoroughly than they comprehended them. I didn't merely market them a solution. I demonstrated why remaining with our organization was their sole viable choice. That morning, my schedule contained 1 entry: final examination and execution. I was expected to enter the conference hall, present the customer with their paperwork, and confirm a collaboration that would sustain our performance through the following 2 quarters. However, I never reached the appointment. At 7:48 a.m., I received an internal communication from Human Resources. No salutation, no background. Simply 1 sentence. Please present yourself to meeting room 6. Arrive before business hours commence. What transpired was brief, precisely worded as though it had received prior authorization. They stated I had circumvented new documentation protocols, that I had failed to maintain my supervisor adequately informed, that my interaction approach generated transparency issues. Therefore, without advance notice, without communication from my supervisor, I was dismissed. No conference, no handshake, no documentation. The final action I performed was accessing my corporate email and composing 1 communication. I did not direct it to my supervisor. I sent it to the customer. It maintained politeness. It remained straightforward. It informed them I would no longer serve as their contact person. It did not clarify why I departed the facility minutes afterward. Nobody intercepted me. Nobody expressed gratitude, and nobody maintained eye contact. I did not weep. I did not experience panic. I had witnessed this scenario previously. What they remained unaware of was that I had already executed my strategy weeks earlier. However, I'll address that matter. If you continue listening, perhaps during your midday break, perhaps departing as I recently did, create a record. Simply inform me of your listening location. And if this resonates personally, subscribe. You'll desire to learn how this concludes. The journey to the parking area was peaceful but not vacant, because I understood that somewhere beyond this quietude, someone would feel regret for their actions. The incident occurred 4 days before the signature. I attended a meeting where I wasn't supposed to contribute. It was one of those comprehensive floor assessments, the type where everyone examines charts they already understand, acknowledges names they don't value, and applauds figures they didn't help create. Julian, my supervisor, positioned himself at the front with his characteristic composure, indicating a slide labeled Q3 Pipeline Optimism. The term optimism was emphasized. My agreement was listed forth. Not identified by name, naturally, just a heading within a range. However, the amount $65 million appeared in bold typography beneath the title, High Probability. That was novel. I had never characterized it that way. Julian had. I remained silent. I consistently did, but someone at the distant end of the table, someone 2 positions above Julian, posed the inquiry I anticipated would emerge. Who's managing that one?
Silence.
Not extensively, but sufficiently. Then Julian responded, "That's under Vesper. She's been monitoring it." He didn't regard me when he spoke, and I didn't acknowledge. I didn't require it. However, the silence had accomplished something. The moment elapsed, and then, almost casually, the CEO leaned forward. "What's the distinguishing factor there?" he inquired. His tone remained light, but his expression wasn't. Everyone observed Julian.
He observed me.
I could have remained quiet, but I didn't. I explained calmly that it wasn't concerning discounts or software capabilities. It concerned the integration framework, the method we transition the customer into the system, with zero interruption. I had constructed that approach myself after the initial phase nearly failed. The CEO acknowledged. Not to Julian.
To me.
That's effective, he stated. That's intelligent. That was the pivotal moment. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical, but it altered something within the room. Julian said nothing for the meeting's remainder. The following morning, he visited my workstation and instructed me to take a day off before the contract execution. You've deserved it, he said, smiling just enough to communicate he didn't intend it. It wasn't a recommendation. It was a signal, a break, a subtle communication. I had entered a spotlight that wasn't mine to occupy. And that evening, just hours before I was supposed to return to that same conference room, I received the message from HR. One sentence.
No puntuación.
Please present yourself to meeting room 6. Arrive before business hours commence. When I arrived, the decision had already been reached. Julian wasn't present in the room. I maintained a method, not the type they trained you to utilize. Not directories marked with dates or control panels filled with color-coded updates. Mine was more subtle. I preserved a single notebook, always sealed unless I was alone. Within were the components no one else recalled, the inflection a customer used when they said maybe, the hesitation before they accepted a clause, the manner someone's voice lowered when a deadline created anxiety. It wasn't for demonstration. It wasn't for backup. It was for security. Not for myself, but for the agreement. The one they separated me from was delicate. Not in worth, but in framework. Every aspect of it had been earned. I had reconstructed their confidence after a failed trial from a previous team. I had traveled across the nation to sit in a room no one else wanted to enter. I had rewritten the language to reflect what they feared, not what we assumed. And it functioned. The customer had consented to sign, but only after I guided them through the final conditions, one paragraph at a time. I informed them we would proceed slowly the first month, that I wouldn't transfer them to a new representative, that the version we executed would be the version we respected.
No replacements.
They believed that because I did as well. And then I was gone. By mid-morning, the team attempted to continue where I had stopped. Julian arranged a synchronization with legal. He spoke in broad terms. Purchasing time. Legal inquired which version of the agreement was being utilized. Julian glanced toward someone in operations. No one responded. They all presumed someone else possessed the correct file. However, the file wasn't the issue. The draft they discovered had no background. The revisions were labeled by date, not by significance. They couldn't determine which one reflected the verbal modifications I'd made during the final call. They were unaware that the integration timeline had been exchanged after the customer requested a slower beginning. They overlooked the new provision that permitted phased payments, a modification that required 3 weeks of negotiation to secure. The shared storage had directories, but not the type that resolved problems. I observed the confusion from outside. One by one, the inquiries arrived. Do you remember which version had the updated conditions? Can someone verify if the customer reviewed Section 4B? Was there a final on the billing framework? They didn't approach me, but the customer did. Just before lunch, they sent a brief note.
Baspe.
Please verify who will be managing the review call tomorrow. We want to ensure we're aligned on the language from last week. They were cautious with their phrasing, but I could interpret the shift. They had detected the silence. They desired stability. They weren't going to execute anything they didn't recognize. I didn't respond. Instead, I allowed the silence to precede me. I forwarded the message not to legal, not to operations, to Julian.
No explanation.
No follow-up, just the original thread, untouched. I imagined his expression when he read it. The timestamp, the customer's tone, the pressure of pretending he maintained control. However, the truth was simple. He didn't. Because the version they had approved, the one that mattered, was the version I had documented by hand during a video conference. They insisted it not be recorded. I had written every word, confirmed every point, and promised them I would not allow it to slip through someone else's control. And now they were holding me to that promise. The morning of the execution, they attempted to gain entry. Not the front entrances, not the elevators. Into the files, into the calls, into everything I had constructed without ever requiring permission to do so. They contacted IT first, requested emergency access to all project directories under my name. Then legal intervened. They wanted access to private notes, customer drafts, follow-up logs, anything that might indicate a finalized version. However, they weren't seeking records. They were seeking certainty, and certainty was never stored in a directory.
My notes weren't on the drive.
Not because I concealed them, but because no one asked me to share them before they removed me. They had assumed what I carried was merely process, replaceable, reproducible.
Standard.
They forgot that genuine agreements, the type that shift entire quarters, are never standard. I used to meet the customer every Friday at 7 a.m. their time, not because it was mandatory, but because that was when they felt composed enough to think. That was when they posed the genuine questions. The type that never appeared in emails. I knew what concerned them. I knew which departments were slow to embrace change. I knew their head of procurement didn't trust automated billing. I knew which version of the contract avoided all those concerns. Julian didn't. At 9:12 a.m., he sent a message to the customer. Friendly, confident. Looking forward to our call today. We'll review the final agreement and discuss next steps. They didn't reply. Instead, they sent a request back to the general inbox. We'd like Vesper to lead today's review. If she's no longer available, please confirm who has replaced her and when they were introduced to the project. No one answered for 30 minutes. Then someone from operations forwarded the email to Julian with a single line. Do we have a name? I wasn't in the room, but I could envision the silence, the shifting glances, the quiet panic of people who had removed the one person their customers still trusted. That afternoon, Julian filed an urgent request with HR. Access to all of my previous project files and communication logs. However, most of my work existed outside of templates, meeting summaries, and notebooks. Personal agreements confirmed in casual calls, relationship threads that couldn't be downloaded. What they found in my inbox was clean, polite, but empty because I had already transferred everything I needed to the people who requested it when it mattered. The remainder I took with me. That evening, the customer sent a final message. Not to me, to the company. We'll need to delay the signing until we've reviewed the terms with a representative we recognize. It wasn't anger. It wasn't rejection. It was worse. It was the beginning of a pause they couldn't control. The first voice that reached the top wasn't Julian's. It was the customer's. They bypassed every usual layer. No assistant, no delay. Just a direct call to the CEO, a number they rarely used, saved only for moments that shaped quarters, not contracts. The call lasted 6 minutes, long enough to shift a company's posture. They opened with a statement, not a complaint. We were ready to sign. The structure made sense. The pace matched our needs. But something changed, and the person we trusted, she's gone. The CEO listened without interruption. He asked for dates, names, and details. He didn't need background. He recognized the customer's tone, measured, calm, decisive. The type of tone that signaled more than disappointment. It signaled a turning point. Right after the call, he summoned Julian. The meeting took place on the executive floor. Lights low. No one else invited. He began with a simple line. I just spoke to the customer. They're hesitating. Explain. Julian walked him through numbers, then timelines, then personnel. He spoke in layers, stacked phrases, corporate phrasing. The kind that folds in on itself. He mentioned transition plans, alignment talks, forecast revisions. However, not once did he speak with the weight of someone who understood what had been lost. The CEO let him finish, then asked a single question. When did she leave? Julian paused. That was the moment. The room had no windows, but the pressure shifted. Answers fell short of the space they were meant to fill. Later that afternoon, a finance meeting was called without prior notice. The quarterly projection slide appeared under high priority revenue, $65 million. The customer's name sat in a line of bold text next to it. Vesper Quinn, account owner. No one had updated it. The CEO looked around the table. She's still listed. Does this number hold? The slide stayed up. Everyone stayed still. Then the CEO asked the question that didn't need follow-up. Who closed it? No strategy, no filter. Just clarity. Julian shifted in his seat. He gestured toward the broader team. He mentioned group collaboration, multi-phase contribution, support roles. His voice stayed even, but the timeline in his answer drifted. People noticed across the table. One person pulled out an internal summary. They flipped to the negotiation log. Every note circled back to the same initials, VQ. No one spoke them aloud, but they didn't need to. That evening, legal flagged the customer delay as material. Compliance joined the call. HR was asked for a review of personnel transitions in the last 4 weeks. The CEO asked for everything tied to the deal. One sentence appeared across all reports. Primary relationship, Vesper Quinn. The number stayed where they had placed it, right in the center of the screen. $65 million, framed by a confident title. Revenue confirmed for the next 3 quarters. It looked steady, clean, safe. However, no one in that room believed it anymore. The estimate had come from weeks of updates, pieces pulled from different departments, gathered, approved, and polished for the board. However, that number had one real source: me. I had built it over months. Every detail was based on conversations that went far beyond emails. The timing of payments, the start date, the small risks the customer never wanted in writing. All of it came from my understanding. I knew what they needed before they asked, and I knew what they feared if we moved too fast. Now the number sat alone, my name still underneath it, but no one left could explain what it truly meant. They began to pull reports one by one, looking for confirmation. A team member checked the latest version of the agreement. It had comments, not signatures. The pricing looked correct, but one term had changed since the last approval. The page about technical setup had a note marked, pending review. Someone pointed out a line that had been revised 2 weeks earlier, but no one could say who had made the change. Questions circled fast. Is this version the one we sent? Did the customer approve this section? Are we sure this payment schedule is accurate? Every answer led to a pause, and every pause led back to the same place. The person who used to answer those questions was no longer here. Julian tried to speak. He reminded them that the deal was in progress, that the customer had never raised objections, that everything would be resolved soon. However, the room had already begun to shift. Someone from finance asked, "Who has confirmed this number recently?" Another added, "Has anyone spoken to the customer this week directly?" A voice from the far end of the table said, "She was always the one on the weekly calls. She knew which version we were using. She set the timeline." And then the CEO stepped in with a question no one had prepared for. If she was not leading the final phase, why is she still listed as the owner of the deal? The sentence landed without echo. Just stillness, sharp and cold. Julian adjusted his seat. His hands stayed folded. He began to talk about collaboration, about team structures, about shared responsibility. However, the words moved slowly and no one followed them. By mid-morning, the team removed the number from the confirmed list. They didn't erase it, just changed its color from green to gray. A small shift, but enough to signal that trust had slipped. The room didn't speak my name after that, but the absence stayed. Every chart, every slide, every question now carried a space no one could fill. The deal was supposed to fund more than a sales victory. It was tied to promises made in the final week of the quarter. Leadership had reviewed a proposal to unlock bonus shares for the executive team. The calculation leaned heavily on one line, $65 million, labeled as revenue expected before year-end. It sat in every projection. That amount was the difference between exceeding targets and barely reaching them. It shaped how much managers would receive, how many roles would be open next quarter, and how far the company could stretch its narrative when presenting to investors. Julian had submitted the proposal himself. He had written that the deal was in closing. He had attached 3 slides to justify it. He had made sure his name appeared twice. Mine did not appear at all. By that point, the customer had gone quiet.
No e-mails, no reschedules, no explanation.
The company waited, checking inboxes that stayed empty. Some tried calling. Others asked if the customer might be reconsidering terms. One person wondered if a delay meant legal was still reviewing. However, I already knew what silence meant. Silence is not absence. It is preparation. That Friday, the customer's senior contact forwarded a message to the company's general inbox. The subject line was short: duplicate proposal. The body was shorter. We've received this structure from another party. Please confirm whether this reflects your intended offer. The forwarded message showed a familiar set of terms. The pricing was identical. The timeline matched. The headings were slightly changed, but I recognized the phrasing. It was the exact version I had walked the customer through 2 weeks earlier, word for word. Except it didn't come from the company. It came from a competitor. I didn't need to guess who had shared it. The path was too clean. Only a few people had access to that version. Julian was one of them. He had tried to keep the deal alive, just not through his own hands. The customer hadn't responded to the offer. They hadn't rejected it either. They had paused, stepped back, and now they were asking a different question. Who controls this deal? Inside the company, the silence turned sharp. People stopped replying to group messages. The bonus proposal sat on the table during the executive review and signed, unresolved. No one wanted to be the one who approved a payout based on a number that had just leaked out through a side door. The CEO asked for a delay. Julian tried to defend the structure. He pointed to earlier notes. He said the customer had not declined. However, the room had already shifted. They weren't reacting to a lost deal. They were reacting to a sign that someone inside had tried to move it without permission. And they were starting to ask the question no one had spoken aloud yet. If the person who held the deal steady was gone, and the one who claimed credit had just lost control of it, then who exactly had been running the show? The subject line arrived on a quiet afternoon. No noise in the hallway, no new meetings, just a single notification in the inbox of a private account I no longer used for work. Hope we can reconnect. Julian's name sat above it, still spelled clean, still wearing the same title. The message began with warmth or the shape of it. Wanted to reach out and say I regret how things unfolded. Would love to find a way to work together again. There may be a role in a consulting capacity. No acknowledgement of what he had done. No mention of the proposal he had passed along through back channels. No ownership of the silence that had followed the customer's request for answers. He ended with a line that nearly made me smile. We're still hoping to salvage the relationship, as if it was still theirs to salvage. I didn't respond, but I did forward it to the CEO. I added no note, just the email and one other file, a recording. Not dramatic, not secret, just an old call from a month earlier, before the signing date was set, before the calendar had shifted. Julian's voice came through clearly, calm, pleased, mid-conversation. She's done her part, he said. Once the contract's prepared, we'll take it from here. He didn't say it like a plan. He said it like a move already made, the kind of line that tells you someone believes the deal is theirs now, no matter who built it. I never sent the recording when I left. Not out of fear, just timing. Letting people fail at their own pace has a special kind of weight. That week, the internal thread shifted tone. A senior partner quietly flagged the forwarded proposal in an investor update. Another asked whether future deals should require new access policies. One person, not someone from my team, tagged Julian and wrote, "Can you clarify who originally structured the phased rollout plan?" He didn't reply.
I didn't read the rest.
By then, I had moved on. My badge was long gone, my name erased from their directory, but the terms I had written still echoed through every empty reply, every stalled meeting, every version of the contract they no longer trusted. And in every attempt to pull the pieces back together, they kept discovering the same thing. The only person who could fix it was no longer interested. The first sign wasn't a message. It was the absence of one. Every morning that week, someone refreshed the thread. Nothing arrived. No updates, no requests, just an empty string of messages stretched longer with each passing hour. A name stayed pinned at the top, one the team had relied on for months, but the replies had stopped. The customer wasn't asking questions anymore. They weren't sending corrections. They had gone quiet in the way experienced customers do when they are already somewhere else. Inside the office, people stayed later than usual. Lights stayed on past 9, desks filled with silent gestures, papers stacked, tabs open, coffee left half-finished. One manager rewrote the onboarding plan for the 3rd time. Another drafted a new pricing model, softer, thinner, cheaper than the one I had fought to protect. No one said it out loud, but they were trying to rebuild something without the blueprint. They were working from fragments. Julian stayed in his office most of the day. He didn't speak much, but he approved a new outreach, A final message sent to the customer, framed as reassurance. We understand the hesitation. We remain open to adjustments. Please let us know how you'd like to proceed. It was sent at 5:40 in the evening. Polite, precise, empty. I read it not because they copied me, they didn't. The customer did. They forwarded it to me with a single line. Thought you should see this. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The deal had already chosen its direction. 3 days later, the news reached them. Not through a call, not even through a direct email. It came as a link, a short press release released through the customer's official page, titled cleanly. 5 paragraphs, standard language. However, the final line cut deeper than anything else they had encountered. The agreement will be executed in partnership with Alta North Group. No one in my old office had heard of the name. Some Googled it. Some checked the registration. It was a new firm. Small, sharp, built to move fast. The leadership page listed 5 names. Mine was 4th, Vesper Quinn, partner, client strategy. No flourish, no headline, just listed as if I had always belonged there. The following day, Julian canceled 2 meetings. His assistant closed his calendar for the week. A quiet change appeared in the internal directory. His name slid to on leave. No one said why. Inside the company, the conversations dimmed. The number $65 million was removed from every forecast. A different color appeared in the dashboards where green had once held, gray, then blank. They didn't call. They didn't write. Not out of pride, out of knowledge. Because even those who had never worked beside me now understood something that could no longer be ignored. The deal had never been theirs to claim. It had only passed through their system, but it had grown in my hands. And the moment they let go of me, they let go of the only connection that mattered. They opened the old folder that morning, the one marked Client Final, with a label printed too early and a signature line left too late. Inside, the contract remained untouched. 73 pages, full formatting, prepared, reviewed, and stored as if certainty could be printed into paper. The document held the company's colors, the customer's name, and space for the moment that never came. 2 people from legal reviewed it in silence. They read each page slowly, checking for updates they already knew were missing. One highlighted a section, the other just looked at the line that waited for a name. No one had touched the file since the day I walked out. The formatting held, but the meaning had drained. It wasn't a contract anymore. It was a record of assumption. Later that day, an intern was asked to refile it. She placed it back into its sleeve, slid it into the cabinet, and closed the drawer. No ceremony, no memo, just one more artifact in a system built for speed, but not for silence. Across the city, the real version of that deal moved forward. The customer finalized the signature just after 10:30. No call, no hesitation. The terms remained exactly as we had built them. Structured across 3 quarters, phased rollout, anchored by a delivery plan designed for a company that refused to be rushed. The confirmation came in a file transfer, short subject line, clean attachments. Inside, a copy of the signed contract. Alongside it, a message sent from the customer directly to my inbox. Contract closed. Structure held. Thanks for the framework. I opened the file and scrolled slowly. Each section returned in order: timeline, pricing, transition windows. The details aligned with the final version I had kept in my notes, the one built after our last early morning call when they asked me whether this timeline would hold. It did. On the last page, under the customer's signature, a small note appeared. Not a logo, not a quote, just a line. Initial consultation and deal design, Vesper Quinn. They hadn't asked if I wanted credit. They didn't ask permission to write it. They simply placed it there as fact. Meanwhile, inside the company I had left, another meeting had been scheduled, a standing update slot originally created for this account alone. Only 2 people showed up. The room stayed quiet. The screen remained off. No documents were opened. One of them asked, without turning their chair, "Should we remove it from the forecast?" The other nodded. The line disappeared the next hour. No one replaced it. However, the original document, the one they had printed, labeled, and stored, remained in that drawer. Its last page still blank, still expecting a name, still waiting for a moment they believed belonged to them. It won't be revised. It won't be passed on. It will sit there until someone forgets what it was for. Because the deal is closed, the work is moving, and the only version that lives carries a name they can no longer reach.